on our reflections on the film A Real Pain, which was directed by Jesse Eisenberg.
Burke,
Okay.
when you're ready.
I always thought his name was Eisenberg. Okay.
So hi everybody, I'm here with Jeanine, and today we're talking about the movie A Real Pain, which was written and directed by Jesse Eisenberg, also the actor who played Mark Zuckerberg in The Social Network. He and Kieran Culkin play cousins who reunite for a Jewish heritage tour through Poland in honor of their late grandmother. So today we will talk about the themes from the movie that stood out to us. Hi Jeanine.
Hi, how are you?
Good. So we both caught the movie on a flight, isn't that
Yeah.
right?
Yes. Interestingly, the film is about traveling, so it was quite apt, I guess, that we saw it on the plane, and perhaps maybe that's why it resonated with the both of us.
I think so. In fact, the scene that stood out to me the most was the beginning and the end, where Kieran Culkin's character was waiting at the airport. What do you think the placement of that from your perspective?
I feel that the whole point of starting with this one shot and then ending it with the same shot shows this idea of coming full circle in a way, and the idea of life being cyclical in the sense that they've just gone through the journey, but ultimately he's still in the same spot, Kieran Culkin's character. And you actually wonder to what extent he has changed. I think that's what the whole point of those shots are. It's for us, it's actually for the audience to question and to ask. But I also think it's very reflective of how life is, that there are no easy resolutions. And again, this is to Jesse Eisenberg's credit to make it realistic, to have an ending that's not, oh, okay, fairy tale, everything ends with a sugar-coated kind of with a closure and all that. The fact that the closure is ambiguous and that we don't know what his next step is, I think it is very real. Where do you go from here? So I think the ending of it reflects that, this position of having moved, but actually still very much in the same spot, because you still have the same questions you had at the beginning of the film. I'm talking in terms of the character, where life is still uncertain and a lot of his problems are still there. He's not cured, or none of his issues are resolved.
You've brought up so many good points. I think one of them that you mentioned is very true, which is to leave the audience questioning, like, why is he still back at the airport? And why did he turn down that nice gesture from his cousin to say, come back to my house, have dinner with us? He actually said, no, thank you. I will just remain at the airport. So it really left so many audiences wondering why, that if you do a Google search of why does Benji stay at the airport, you'll get so many answers. But from the IndieWire interview, which Jesse Eisenberg did with the film journalist, he said that it's symbolic of the kind of place a character like Kieran Culkin can exist. That's why he chose to have him start and end there. Perfect for his kind of personality, where he is charming, like great at small talk, with all these people that you only meet once at the airport. So it's like the perfect place to represent this character.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I did think about that as well. Like the transience of the airport, the fleeting encounters. Enjoy going there in a way, whether it's because you're traveling or even just to go there just to hang out. People generally enjoy it, but it is transitory. It's not permanent. There is this sense of impermanence there. So I think, yeah, you're right.
All Jesse. And also he mentioned a point about how mercurial Kieran Culkin is. His feelings are all over the place, and that the airport is a very distracting place. So it suits his personality. And if you notice all the types of shots that they got of him sitting and waiting at the airport, it's like very close to his face.
I was gonna say about that. The cinematography is, you could have these wide vistas of the airport, right? Because such a large place. But actually what you get are very tight, close shots of him to emphasize the fact that despite the vastness of the location, he actually feels it is a very intimate space for him. And the shots, the close shots, the tighter shots reflect.
Going on from the scene, the start in the beginning of it, it was just Jesse's character leaving Kieran Culkin's character's copious multiple voice memos. And that is also telling of how his character would be like. Having not seen him but heard him first, wow, immediately I had that feeling of anxiety. I was, oh my, this guy is just very compulsive and very persistent. Like he hasn't even gotten a response from his recipient and he's just dropping voice notes and messages like nonstop. I mean, yeah, think of it.
So are you asking about the characters now? Yeah, I think the two characters are very well set up. They are, in a way, polar opposites. You've got, not only are they polar opposites, but then you've got the idiosyncrasies of these extreme characters, which makes them very oppositional. Which in film, in script writing, it's just great characterization and great opportunities to create conflict, because in film or in storytelling, if there is no conflict, there is no story, right? So the fact that you have all these little idiosyncrasies that make them extremely antagonistic helps in the storytelling, helps in the characterization. But at the same time, it is compelling because what underlies their conflict is actually a deep love for each other, which is very, in that sense, very meaningful and in a way powerful and very true to life for most people. Because if you think about the people that you hold nearest and dearest are really the people that half the time you want to strangle them, right? Because you just have these endless conflicts and quarrels about nothing at all, really, if you think about it. And so I think in that sense, the characterization and the script writing is very true to life, very real. And I like the details that Jesse put into the characterizations. I read one interview, I don't know whether you read the same thing, where he mentions why his character has to have two bags. If I'm not wrong. Yeah. So, yeah, okay. Again, I read this some time ago, but it has to do with he's so neurotic, right? That he believes his clothes and his laptop cannot be in the same space. So therefore he has to have two bags. And so that it's just details like this that speak to his kind of neurotic character, which makes him very real as a character. And the same thing for Benji, right? The fact that he is so blasé about many things, but at the same time uptight about certain things, again, reflect his contradictions, right? Which I think, again, speak to very realistic and relatable character, right? Where we know a lot of people who are like that. Yeah.
Interesting how you say that in screenwriting, it's good for conflict to be present, and therefore creating two characters who are so different and would antagonize each other is a good thing. So I think Jesse Eisenberg successfully wrote two extremely different personalities. However, I do think that they interacted with each other in a very pleasant way. There was underlying tension, but you could see that they were not trying to argue or fight or challenge each other. In fact, it was constantly being overridden by their effusive I miss you, man. Like, it's been so long. This is a trip that we should have done long ago. It's as if they think that by using all these pleasantries, that it would override the underlying tension.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that comes across as the film progresses, right? Jesse's character suppressing a lot of his anger towards the cousin and his frustration. And that's why it builds up, but he's nice about it. He doesn't blow up at him. And that with the photo taking at the monument, yeah, scene. But you can feel his frustration, and that grows and builds up where finally he has that kind of that
At the dinner scene with the other people on tour,
like that outburst, right? Which is again for him, if you think about it in terms of character,
uncharacteristic of him.
very uncharacteristic. And so it shows it's the climax, right? He has suppressed and he has been very reserved and held back the whole time. And finally he erupts. And when he erupts, the truth comes out. And you feel more for him when that happens, because you realize again, that this is someone who has bared with all this real pain of this cousin, right? And probably taken a lot of shit from him, so to speak. And finally just letting it out. And it's liberating. And you breathe a sigh of relief when you see that happen. And you think, good for him, good for him. Because interestingly, in that moment, he becomes his cousin.
Yeah, but that scene was a bit confusing for me because I thought that it was disloyal of him to air their dirty laundry to a bunch of strangers, sharing such intimate details. To me, it just seemed like a betrayal. Yes, he might have reached his limit, and it was his form of release. Like, he had nowhere else to complain words, but that was very uncharacteristic of him, and also shows a side of his personality that he isn't as virtuous as he thinks he is.
Correct. Which, again, I also think is the layering of the characters, which probably makes them deeper than just the binary stereotypes.
And that Jesse Eisenberg created characters that are also contradictory. Because a guy like Benji, played by Kieran Culkin, he's so good with people, with strangers, getting them to open up, connecting well with them on their first encounter. You would think that somebody like that has a high level of self-awareness and social awareness.
Opening up and sharing of himself and sharing of their family and sharing of the cousin, which shows the change in his character, which I find interesting because normally in script writing, we make sure that the characters change from who they were at the beginning of the film. And I see that with Jesse's character. I'm not so sure I see it with Benji's character. I'm still trying to figure that out. Like, what is his change? And interestingly, because he is the main protagonist, I would say, the title of the film, A Real Pain, it's about him, actually. Okay, we'll talk about the symbolism and the deeper meaning. But on the surface level, he is the real pain. Interestingly, to what extent his character changes?
I think it wouldn't be an obvious change, but rather a revelation to him, which is that his grandmother thought that he was a real pain. Because he always thought that he was so beloved by their late grandmother. But then his cousin revealed to him that it wasn't the case. So I think that coming away with that new knowledge is that change in him.
Okay, I'm not sure that this character, he's supposed to have grown. Has he grown? Yeah. I don't know whether the ending conversation with Jesse's character shows that he's grown. What do you think?
I don't think so, because I don't think his character has that emotional maturity to. Jesse Eisenberg is trying to portray the dichotomy of them, right? How different they experience feelings. Benji would be very volatile in experiencing all his emotions, like feeling the high highs and the low lows. and also staying within the shallow level of social etiquette, which is why he does well with strangers. But somebody like Jesse's character, David, he would be somebody who you wouldn't naturally want to speak to at an event, but when he can go deep, you might enjoy a conversation with him. But he doesn't show off his whatever he's feeling. Can I circle back to the point where you said that David becomes Benji when he did that speech? And because in that speech, he did mention that he had wanted to be like Benji all his life. Yeah. So that's somebody who knows that he's not expressive, who admires somebody who can speak their mind.
Yeah, his journey, the journey that his character takes, does go through that kind of transformative change. But I think it's less so the case for Benji's character, from what I remember from the film. And I guess going to what you said, based on their characterizations, perhaps that also speaks to the reality, because maybe that's the extent to which he can function. I'm talking about Benji now.
His capacity.
Yeah, his capacity, correct. Like some people, you can just tell them and that they will still continue the way they are. And perhaps, yeah, I don't know. I feel like, no, okay, but I guess the change I was hoping for is that a kind of change in terms of his dealing with his issues, like whether he would be better, would he be able to manage his emotions better? Would he be able to manage his kind of depression and all that? Would he at least have a better handle at it? That's the kind of stuff I don't know. Again, maybe that's me. Okay, this is where I think the difference between the classical or typical Hollywood ending would include a definitive change for Benji. But because this is an independent film, that resolution is not provided. Again, I think this is typical of an independent kind of a way of storytelling. Yeah, endings are not neat because life is not neat in that way, right?
Yes, absolutely. And with regards to how much Benji can change, I think that links it is greatly linked to his personality. Jesse Eisenberg's character, David, did mention that he has OCD, right, and anxiety, but he keeps that under control with medication because he believes that it's not a big deal. I have to get this under control. Life has to go on. But you can't imagine Benji thinking like that, which is why he dwells in his pain. It is unlikely that he would forcibly make a change.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I guess this goes into the sort of philosophical discussion of whether it's better to be authentic in your feeling, the way you deal with life, or whether you should operate in a way that is for the better good of society and make yourself tolerable.
And I think that is what people are struggling with these days, right? How much of yourself, how much of your true self do you really want to show the world versus how much of it is trivial? But then who is the judge of it? Is it trivial? So I think in this case, Benji would think that his issues are very serious and that there's no way out, and therefore he had an attempted suicide. Whereas somebody, David, would then say, no, life is to be led and I have a family, I need to keep going. And so I need to use whatever tools I can to get to feel better, to function.
Mm. Yeah, true.
Such a good point about whether that reflects how authentic they are in life.
Yeah, I think it's just different life views. Someone like Benji, I don't think, is it mentioned in the film? I don't think he would ever take medication or anything like that.
But it's also interesting how he medicates with weed.
Yeah, but that's not medication, that's escaping, right, from the problem. It's
So, following the theme of what you said about Benji being considered a real pain,
Yeah.
shall we talk about that? About what is your perceived meaning of the movie?
Yeah, of course, we can see that there is a double meaning with the title. On the surface level, Benji is the pain in David's life. But of course, the bigger pain is the Holocaust. Yeah, that whole experience is one of the biggest human tragedies in the history of humanity. So interestingly, two pains, the two levels of pain pitted against each other. And then you see how ridiculous and how trivial David's pain is, I guess, right? In view of this much larger pain that the victims of the Holocaust and the Jewish community has had to deal with. However, again, being human, David, the biggest pain is his cousin. I think when he goes and he sees the concentration camp and that whole experience, I think perhaps we get the sense that he realizes that what he thought was a big issue turns out to be actually nothing in comparison to the pain that his grandmother and all these people who survived the Holocaust or who suffered from the Holocaust dealt with. So it's brought home, right? At that point in that scene, after the concentration scene, the two pains come together and you realize, yeah, what is actually more important and what is actually more the real pain. Yeah.
To just bring up a line in the movie that David mentioned, which I thought was very mature to me. So let's see how it feels to you. He said that, yeah, I feel pain and everything, but my pain is unexceptional. That's what David said. So it's his perspective. Yes, it's not that he doesn't feel anything and everything. He does, but he just doesn't want to make a big deal out of it.
Yes. Which I think is, this whole understated approach to life. But if you want to be philosophical and again, I guess from a film reading point of view, that is also painful, right? To constantly have to repress yourself in that way is also painful in a way. You may not realize it as painful, but it takes a certain effort and it is pain as well, actually. Because, unlike he will never have the kind of freedom that Benji enjoys. He will never have that form of liberation. So that in itself is also a pain that he has to endure. He doesn't think it's painful. What he says is not exceptional. He doesn't think it's painful. But it is actually, in a way. And okay, so I forgot, I wanted to say, so the two pains coming together, right? I think also culminates in the scene where they finally go to the grandmother's house. And it's completely anticlimactic, right? Because they even look at the door of the house and say, oh, that's it. So it reinforces this whole idea, like this was the end goal of their journey. And when they got there, it was nothing spectacular and there was no great moment or revelation or anything like that. I think in that scene, the two pain come together because there are two ways to look at it. It shows that Benji is a pain, not a big issue. And the whole issue with the Holocaust, it's past. People have moved on. That's why even when they wanted to pay the tribute to the grandma and put the stones there, they were told by the neighbor, don't do it because
The elderly lady might trip on the rock.
correct. So the message is we have moved on and not that we forget, right? It's not about that, but it's you don't have to make a show of it. And I think it's about reminding us that the quiet reflection and having understood and gone through the journey and having this quiet reflection is probably enough.
All right. This Jesse Eisenberg, it's really like the king of, would you say satire? Isn't this also a bit of him questioning, putting the question in our minds, trying to get us to ask ourselves if our pain is considered trivial versus whatever bigger issues there are out there? Do you think he does communicate that in this movie?
I think he's asking us to question the real issues in life and to reflect on the things that we are actually bothered by, how big a deal are they really? He's not belittling it, but yeah, I think again, bringing in perspective and looking at it from a wider point of view.
Questioning what is real pain.
There's also this whole thing with this quote where life in the long run is a comedy, but in the short run and up close feels like a tragedy.
So it's about having that broader perspective, like a longer run view.
Yeah, that a bigger sense of understanding of things and accepting that some of these bigger issues have a lot bigger pain, but they're not issues that are easily resolved or can ever be resolved. And we just have to deal with them, which is why I think the keeping of the stone, that act that they did where they take the stone and they keep it with them, I think that's quite meaningful because it's instead of a big showy way of expressing, okay, I've come to terms with it or whatever. It's just a silent gesture of, okay, I understand now, I accept, but I'm also moving on. lah.
I also think that it was very clever for Jesse to write Benji as a character to be somebody that isn't very likable. And he symbolizes a little bit of every one of us.
You don't think he's likable?
Not at all. He blows up at trivial things at the expense of sacrificing the comfort of the bigger group who had to wait for them when they missed the train stop. And he has no qualms just being a nuisance in a group setting and expecting people to empathize with him. And his feedback to the tour guide affects the tour guide so much. So he may think that he's being such a straight shooter, authentic, direct, emotionally attuned person. But in a bigger group or on a reality show, he'll be voted off first.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm curious, when you read the online kind of chatter, is he liked or not liked?
I didn't read about that. But to me personally, he didn't come off as somebody very likable. But following this style of writing that Jesse Eisenberg has written, A Real Pain is his second film. And his first one is called When You Finish Saving the World. So it is making fun of people who think that they're do-gooders.
Okay.
And actually, they are quite hypocritical and they are doing all this to fill a hole inside them. So I think that he's such a clever person who is a keen observer of what's going on in real life.
I disagree though that he wrote this character to be unlikable. The fact that the film ends with all the tour participants loving him and even the tour guide, after receiving that harsh criticism, still there's a warm exchange and they part on very friendly terms. I get the sense that he is actually meant to be a lovable character and he's written to be lovable. So it's interesting for me to hear you say that you didn't like him.
I saw it from a different point of view. For example, in all his blow-ups in the group, you could see from everyone's expression that they were shocked, taken aback, right? And then when they finally understood the backstory from the way David shared, I think that shock, surprise turned to sympathy. And I think that going away, that departure, that leaving each other was really just all the best. And I think some of them did say that you take care and, all the best to you. That's how I took it. People rarely have very strong emotions towards people that you've just met. He's okay, he's passable, but I bet you if you were to survey them and say, would you go on a tour with this guy again? The answer would be no.
Oh, really? I don't know. I got the sense that the rich lady definitely connected with him.
You mean Baby from Dirty Dancing?
Was that her?
Such
Huh?
a way.
Okay. Yeah, she looked familiar. I didn't realize. Okay. I did get the sense that there were genuine, like they were not feeling pity for him. And that when they said goodbye and take care, I didn't feel like that was a pity thing. I did feel like they genuinely cared him. There may be some element of sympathy, and yes, this is a guy who has some emotional issues and what have you. But I did get the sense that they genuinely liked him. And Jesse confirms that by saying he is well liked. People love him. How did I feel? I didn't dislike him. I did find him charming. I did find him funny.
I found him smart alecky because when he connected with the rich divorcee, and then he gave David a little bit of the gossip. And then when David followed up, he snapped at him and saying, I'm not gonna talk about her behind her back. So somebody who's I have the upper hand, right? I'm good with people. They gave me some intel. I'm just gonna tease you with a little bit, but I don't even have to tease you with that info. But I just want to show you that hey, people tell me things and not you.
But again, yeah, it's interesting your reading of it. I don't think he's doing it with that intention. He is actually very unconscious of it. He's almost like an adult child who's very indulgent and just is like of the moment and doesn't check himself. And there is a certain charm to that, I suppose. But it's very interesting that you are coming from this angle where I don't know. It feels almost like an Asian perspective, right? Where we tend to repress, be more like David's character.
So when you asked what the public thought of Benji, I'm on Reddit now, and they said Bill Payne, the best written character of the year, and they are talking about the role of Benji. So they said, maybe as somebody who is socially awkward with constant foot and mouth syndrome, that I feel put off when the story gives the benefit of doubt to rude people. The one example that really rubbed me the wrong way was his confronting the tour guide. The sentiment itself was not bad, but the way it was done loudly in front of the group aggressively made me feel anxiety for the tour guide. Yeah. I'm mixed on it. I largely couldn't get past Benji's volatility. Kept thinking to myself how if I met a human like this in real life, I would probably loathe them before getting as far away as possible. Yeah. So the guy depicted here is mainly just an asshole with little social awareness, but he wears his heart on his sleeve and desperately wants to connect with others. And some people think he's bipolar.
So it's all negative.
This thread is, but I do think that it's intentional because people can perceive the title of the movie to be Benji. And a real pain is a real pain versus what is actually real pain.
Yeah, I don't know why. I get it. Of course I do see it, but I didn't come away disliking him. That's the thing. That's what I'm trying to say. Maybe that's the beauty of the character or his performance, which was award winning, that he played being a pain in the ass. Made it seem appealing in a way.
Yeah, if you Google Benji irritating the real pain Reddit, they said, I found it really cringe and annoying. It made me grumpy. And then Cinema from the Spectrum said that it can be annoying, but it's what keeps us human. And then there is Towns Post Network said that the Benji character is annoying, rude, and profane. On one hand, he instantly connects with people. Then some people found him too grating and irritating. And he's hypocritical. Yes, actually, that word is hypocritical. How can you be so good with people and so inconsiderate? And how can you be so thoughtless, caring about his cousin? Yeah.
But at the same time, I think we know a lot of people like this, right? So
his character is very complex and that it's not written to be one-dimensional to say he's hateful, but he has all these characteristics that make him like this, and some of them may get on your nerves.
I also think that it's also the framing of the storytelling that it seems to be maybe biased towards David's perspectives. If you think about who's the storyteller in this film, it's David.
That's a good point.
So obviously Benji is going to come off looking more negative than maybe he is in real life. So I think that has to be considered, which is why I think I saw a more balanced, because I think I realized that, and okay, he's also biased, obviously, and he's angry, he's repressed. So obviously he's going to make the cousin look more annoying than perhaps he really is. But at the same time, he can, okay, put it this way. If a person is abominable, so if he was an abominable man character, the cousin would not have anything to do with him.
Okay, you bring up such a great point because Jesse was also trying to put that question to us, which is they are cousins. What do they share? They share grandparents. And the grandmother that they were both close to had passed on. So he did question, now that the only thing that connects us is gone, do we stay connected? Yeah, you're questioning that. So it may be familial. They actually do seem to be trying a bit too hard to hype up the trip because it didn't seem like they would be natural friends if they were not related. So I think it comes across that they're trying to make it work. It's really a trip taken in honor of somebody they both loved. And they even brought in weed to mask.
But at the same time, David acknowledges that he wants to be like Benji.
Absolutely. So
It's a love-hate relationship, and I think it would be too basic to say, oh, he's just covering up. I don't think so. I think, of course, he is frustrated and all that, but at the same time, it's almost like you love something, but you hate the idea that you love it.
yes, and also that factor of nostalgia. Because you had such good times. Kieran Culkin's character Benji said that they were joined at the hip as young children, right? That they drifted apart so there's that nostalgia element in the relationship. But you cannot deny that there is that underlying tension that has come up from the way they interact and communicate with each other, which is why this tension builds and builds throughout the movie. And finally, at the end, it ends at the concentration camp.
Mm.
So the writer, Jesse, did say that being at a place like that can either heighten or break the tension for what has happened between the cousins. Tour group members went through that experience together. So now that you've experienced something so big, like why would I hold a grudge against this child, this immature, not sensible person? I'm just gonna wish you the best, wish you love, and bye-bye.
But again, but it's also not an act. I do think they do genuinely like him. Like I said, it's this thing about liking someone, but at the same time, you are annoyed that you like it now. It's almost like an unhealthy addiction, I suppose.
But I also don't think it's so much of David liking Benji wholesale, but rather certain traits of his. Like he wished he could speak to a stranger like Benji, but he does not want to be Benji. Yeah.
Okay. But he says that though. Doesn't he say, I want to be like him?
Yeah. But so that's open to interpretation, right? I want to be like you, but being like you is not you.
Okay, yeah, that's true. That's a good point. Yeah. To have maybe the good points of you, lah.
And really, I think even with relationships with cousins, right? These days it's not so close, but you have that memory of you guys playing together as kids, so much history together, family gatherings and all, but not close per se. All develop our idiosyncrasies and our quirks that might rub each other the wrong way, but you have to put up with it because you're on a trip. You don't want to let a conflict spoil the trip.
Yeah. I think all that is very true. And also, like I said, it reflects the change that his character undergoes because he ends up admitting the truth, which is why I think it's actually healthy for him. Although for you, you said you were uncomfortable with his outburst. But I think it is a healthy way of dealing with the pain, right?
I think, like you said,
It's probably therapeutic.
yes, therapeutic for David. And he has come full circle because when they arrive in the US, he actually extended that olive branch to Benji to say, come over to my house. So I think that extension, that invitation is genuine and warm. He's like, come by, meet my wife, meet my child. We had such a good trip. Let's end it on like a warm note instead of saying goodbye like that. On the other hand, it's warm Benji who declines. He probably is a realist. He might be thinking, oh, what's the point? We'll have a good time tonight, and then tomorrow it'll be the same thing. So I felt safe for a trip and just stay where I want to be.
That's a very cynical way of looking. I just read it as him being like, again, part of his indulging in whatever he was feeling at the time. It's like he felt like staying. He just stayed. I don't think he was thinking like as you are thinking about the implications. He's just a self-indulgent person, and he will just do whatever pleases him at the moment and not think too deeply about things. And when he does think deeply about things, they come at times that are unexpected, which we see happen during the tour, and probably, wrong place, wrong time kind of thing. So he's like that, his character. So I wouldn't psychoanalyze to think that in that way, what you just said. But okay, interesting that you have this.
I want to wrap this up by asking you, as a film professor, having watched a great many movies, what do you think is the driving vehicle of A Real Pain? Is it the storyline? Is it the way the characters are presented? Is it the themes in the movie, like the dissonance, the comparison between a real pain and what actually is a pain? Yeah, like what do you think makes this movie a good one?
It's the relationship between the two characters, which I think is very reminiscent of many of our own familial relationships. Many of us are in situations like this. I think that's one. Of course, the nuances, right? That's written in the oppositions, but the love-hate, but at the same time, the contradictions and the oppositions. I think all that adds layering. So all that is very interesting. But I think to me, what stood out was really the portrayal of a male relationship, like man and another man, but in a family way, and they're not brothers, where there's not deep love, but there's also not deep hate. And so it's this kind of in-between state, which I thought was interesting, but in a way also, I want to say healthy. I don't know if that's the right word. Because if you portray like a bromance thing, then okay, that's very cliched and very hallmark. And then if you portray the opposite, then you've got a toxic relationship, which is, we have a lot of this toxic man kind of stereotype going on, too much of that kind of narrative. So this narrative of, two really regular guys and how they connect and how they try to improve their relationship. I think that is, to me, interesting. I think a lot of people be like, what is that? But I actually think the world needs more of this kind of depictions, because too much of either extreme.